Fellas, ever since Francis Ngannou went over to PFL, became the champion and beat Head for Head, there's been a big debate in MMA over who the best heavyweight is, just in MMA. Some people think it's Francis Ngannou, some people think it's Jon Jones, some people think it's Tom Aspinall. So I'm going to be trying to settle the debate of who is the best heavyweight right now in MMA. I'm going to have arguments for and against each of the three contenders with Aspinall, Jones, and Ngannou to try and find out who actually is the best heavyweight right now in MMA. And we'll start off with Jon Jones, and the arguments for Jon Jones being the best heavyweight right now. So the possible arguments that you could make to say that maybe Jones is the best out of the three. The first one is that he is the undisputed UFC champion. I know a lot of people think that Aspinall is the real champion. He should be kind of, you looked at as the real champion, but technically Jon Jones is the undisputed champion in the UFC, which is the most prestigious belt. And Ngannou's got a belt in PFL, Aspinall's the interim belt. So out of the three of them, the most prestigious belt, even though he might not deserve it, does belong to Jon Jones. He went out there against Cyril Gane, won the belt, and he's been able to hold on to it ever since. Hasn't been stripped from the belt, which is crazy because any other champion would have been stripped, but just because it's Jon Jones, he gets to keep the belt for as long as possible. But he is at the top of the food chain in the heavyweight division. He is the heavyweight champion, so for that reason, that's one argument that you can make to say that Jon Jones is the best. The next reason is he's never lost in the octagon. Now, to be fair, he has only had one heavyweight fight, so this kind of goes off topic when we're talking about purely the heavyweight division, but he's never really lost in the octagon. He's been dominant from the beginning of his UFC career, or the beginning of his MMA career to now. Aspinall's 15-3, he's lost 3 times, and Ngannou's 17-3, he's lost 3 times. Jones is 27-1, but even that one loss was a DQ to the fact that he was absolutely dominating, so there's an argument to make that Jones has never lost. He was the most dominant out of the 3, and therefore you could make an argument that he's the best. And the third one is he beat Cyril Gane easily. Now, I know a lot of people like to complain that Cyril Gane was an easy fight stylistically, which you wouldn't be wrong in saying, but the amount of people picking Cyril Gane to beat Jon Jones in the build-up to that fight, I believe when the odds were first made, Cyril Gane was actually a favourite, and then by the end, Jones was only a little favourite going into the fight. Cyril Gane was on a bit of a streak going into it as well. He was 1-1 in his last 2 before that. He was on a big winning streak, and Jones just effortlessly took Cyril Gane down like it was nothing, latched up the submission pretty comfortably within 2 minutes, and won the fight like it was nothing. The same Cyril Gane that Francis Ngannou took 5 rounds to a decision with, and a lot of people said that Cyril Gane should have had, well, I don't think people were saying it was a robbery, but it definitely was a closer decision than people expected. That's another reason. The fourth reason is he is the greatest of all time. Now, obviously, even though this doesn't really tie into his heavyweight career, most would regard Jon Jones as the greatest of all time for the resume that he's had, the amount of people that he's beaten, 13 title defenses. He was a champion in 2011. He's still a champion today, and he never really lost. A lot of people consider Jon Jones the GOAT, and for that reason, they kind of tie that to his heavyweight career. Out of the 3 of them, Jones has the better legacy. So they automatically assume that he's the better fighter right now. So those are the main reasons why people think Jones is the best heavyweight right now. But the arguments that you can make against Jon Jones being the best is, first of all, he's super inactive. Since March, well, he's fought in March 2023, and we're now in October 2024, and since then, he hasn't fought once, and for the whole pound-for-pound argument is you've got to be active. To be one of the best in the world pound-for-pound, you've got to have some sort of activity. He's had one fight in 57 months from the Dominic Reyes fight to the fight with Stipe. In between the Stipe and the Reyes fight, one fight in 57 months is one of the most inactive, well, probably the most inactive champion we've got in the UFC right now. You've got Tom Aspinall, who's fighting multiple times a year. Jon Jones is sat on Twitter talking about how Aspinall's saying this and how he's saying that, and ranting on Twitter about how he's the greatest of all time. And I understand he got injured. It's not his fault. I'm not saying it's his fault for being inactive when he was scheduled to fight last year, but you can't really say he's the best right now when he's not active. The second or the third reason is he refuses to fight Tom Aspinall, who is the #1 contender. They say to be the best, you have to beat the best, and Jones just ain't doing that. Rather than fighting Tom Aspinall, who's definitely the next contender, I mean, he's the interim champion, like we said, he wants to fight Stipe Miocic. So that's like Sean O'Malley refusing to fight Merab so he can fight Dominic Cruz. That's like Dricus du Plessis refusing Sean Strickland so he can fight Chris Weidman. If you ain't fighting the best and you're picking an easier alternative, you can't really be considered the best. I mean, Tom Aspinall's the interim champion with a defense as well, and he's beaten 5 top 10 heavyweights, and Stipe Miocic is 42 years old. He hasn't fought for 4 years, pretty much, and he got knocked out in his last fight. Tom Aspinall versus Jones is the definitive fight to make in the UFC heavyweight division. It is genuinely the best versus the best. It's what the UFC is supposed to be about. But Jones is so hell-bent on getting this fight with Stipe Miocic. And even before the Aspinall Pavlovich fight, just after Jones beat Gane, the fight to make technically was Pavlovich versus Jones. Obviously, I'm not saying that in hindsight it would have been a good fight, but at the time Pavlovich was on a winning streak. He'd just beat Curtis Blades, which a lot of people saw as a #1 contender fight. So if you ain't beating the best, you can't really be considered the best. At number 4, he's only had 1 fight in the heavyweight division. Tom Aspinall's had 18 heavyweight fights, and Ngannou's had 20 heavyweight fights. Jones has had one. How can you be considered the best heavyweight when you've had one fight in the heavyweight division? And it's not even like that one win was amazing. Jon Jones' win over Cyril Gane was 1-1 in his last two, and he'd already lost to Ngannou. When Ngannou beat Cyril Gane was undefeated, and he was a dangerous contender. Jones, the Stipe that Jones is going to be fighting, is ranked number 8th, coming off a knockout loss, and he's been inactive for 4 years. The Stipe that Ngannou's fought was the heavyweight champion of the world at the time, and he'd literally fought months earlier against DC. And not only to mention the rest of the names that Ngannou was also beaten in the heavyweight division. So if the only win that Jon Jones has in the heavyweight division is Cyril Gane, how can he be considered the best heavyweight right now when Ngannou's beating Gane and so many other people? I don't really get it. The next reason is being a light heavyweight GOAT doesn't make you a heavyweight GOAT. We've already discussed that Jon Jones is definitely the greatest light heavyweight of all time. I guess it can still be a debate because of the whole steroid thing, but most would say that he's the greatest light heavyweight of all time, but that doesn't really affect his heavyweight legacy. Having a W over Cyril Gane, where you haven't beaten Tom Aspinall, you haven't beaten the next big thing, you've had one win over Cyril Gane. Don't get me wrong, one of the most dominant careers in the UFC is Jon Jones. I would consider him the greatest of all time, definitely the greatest light heavyweight of all time, an absolute beast in his prime. All that's cool, but how does that affect his heavyweight legacy? How does that affect what he's done in the heavyweight division? Has he made a mark in the heavyweight division? The answer is no. He hasn't done that. He hasn't even beaten another contender. The only win in the heavyweight division is right now is Gane, and that's all he's got. The next reason against Jon Jones is he's yet to have a super impressive win at heavyweight. Tom Aspinall's had impressive wins. He knocked out Sergey Pavlovich, the scary Russian contender, on short notice. Just finished Curtis Blades. Francis Ngannou knocked Stipe Miocic into next week. Had so many brutal KOs in his resume. Jon Jones, he hasn't beaten Tom Aspinall. He hasn't beaten Ngannou. He hasn't even beaten Pavlovich when Pavlovich was the top contender. He hasn't had a super impressive win in the heavyweight division. The next reason is he didn't look phenomenal against Cyril Gane. Don't get me wrong, he got the win over Cyril Gane in dominant fashion. I'm not trying to take away, but he looked very stiff against Cyril Gane. He looked very slow, very kind of... He just didn't look great. He didn't look... When you were watching Jon Jones against Cyril Gane, you didn't look at him thinking, this guy's going to destroy everyone. When you watch Tom Aspinall, people are saying things like that he is the most skilled heavyweight of all time. People are saying that he's the world's fastest heavyweight, that nobody beats him. When people watch Ngannou, people are saying he's the world's hardest hitter. Nobody can survive Francis Ngannou. He beats everyone. When people watch Jon Jones, like I said before, the result over Cyril Gane was impressive, but the actual performance, nobody was leaving that fight going, oh my gosh, there is nobody on planet Earth that beats Jon Jones. He didn't look too impressive against Jon Jones, so those are the reasons for and against Jones. And then for Francis Ngannou, the guy who's getting talked about a lot recently over his win in PFL, the arguments for Francis Ngannou being the best heavyweight is that he is a former UFC champion, he defended it and he never lost. Tom Aspinall, he's never been undisputed champion. Jon Jones, he's yet to defend his undisputed belt. Francis Ngannou, not only is he a former champion, but he's also defended the belt unlike the two of them. So the fact that he's got the defense, he's had the belt in the UFC, he's got to put him up there. And he never really lost it as well. Obviously, right now the heavyweight champion in the UFC is Jon Jones, but that's only because Ngannou left the UFC to go to PFL, which is quite suspicious how the second that Ngannou left, Jon Jones decides to come back. He's the lineal heavyweight champion in the UFC. Nobody in the top 5 of the heavyweight division has beat him. Nobody in the heavyweight division rankings has beaten him apart from Derek Lewis and Stipe, but Derek Lewis is the only guy who's beaten him and not been beaten back. The next reason for Ngannou being the best is his wins over Gane and Stipe were much more valuable than Jon. I kind of went over this earlier, but the Stipe that Ngannou fought was on a big winning streak. Well, he lost to DC, but apart from that DC loss, which he got back twice, he was on a big winning streak, finishing everyone, pound for pound top 3 in the world. The Stipe that Jones is fighting, 42 years old, hasn't fought since 2021, March 2021, and he got knocked out by Ngannou. The Cyril Gane that Francis Ngannou fought, he was undefeated at 10-0, and he was on a big winning streak in the UFC. The Cyril Gane that Jon Jones fought was 1-1 in his last 2, and he'd already been beaten by Francis Ngannou. Tom Aspinall hasn't beaten both of them. So if we're talking about, Gane and Stipe, the big names at the time, Ngannou's definitely had the better of the two of them. The third reason is he's still a champion in a different organisation. I get it, the UFC is the organisation you want to be in. It's the best organisation for MMA by far. But head and for head, I think he already proved himself to be the best heavyweight outside the UFC. I mean, he was a PFL champion, and he fought Ryan Bader, the Bellator champion as well, and knocked him out in the first round to kind of show that he's the best. So he was definitely the best at the time in PFL, and Francis Ngannou's just gone out there and finished him. So there's no questions as to outside the UFC, Ngannou is the best heavyweight, and he is a champion in a different organisation because he beat the best outside the UFC. The next point I'm going to make for Ngannou is he is on a 7-fight winning streak in MMA. You can bring back the fight with Stipe where he got dominated, the first fight with Stipe where he got dominated, and the fight with Derek Lewis, which he lost a decision, but Right now, he's on a 7-fight winning streak in MMA, and the only guy to survive it was Cyril Gane. Finishes Curtis Blades, finishes Cain Velasquez, finishes Junior Dos Santos, finishes Rosenstrike, finishes Stipe. Doesn't dominate, but beats Cyril Gane pretty comfortably, and then recently goes and finishes Renan Ferreira. The dude is on a 7-fight winning streak in MMA, and the thing that's impressive about this winning streak is he's beaten both old generation and new generation fighters. He beat the old gen in Stipe, Cain Velasquez, and Junior Dos Santos, and he's also beating kind of the new generation in Blades, Cyril Gane, Renan Ferreira, Rosenstrike. So he's beaten multiple different generations of MMA. The next point I've got for Ngannou is that he's deemed as the most dangerous heavyweight on planet Earth. When you think of the heavyweight division, you think of danger, you think of people getting sparked out, you think of the division where people are just going to get put to sleep or people are going to get finished quickly, and I feel like Francis Ngannou perfectly embodies the heavyweight division. You look at Tom Aspinall, you might think he's got better skills than Ngannou, but he could still get chinned. You might think Jon Jones is unbeatable, but he could still get chinned. You might think Fedor Emelianenko was an unstoppable force, or he was an unstoppable force. He could still get chinned. There is not a man on the planet you can with certainty 100% say survives Francis Ngannou in the octagon. There is no way. You might think that Aspinall's more skills. You might think that Jon Jones is unbeatable. But when you're facing Francis Ngannou, there ain't no way you can with full confidence say that they're surviving Ngannou because of how dangerous he is. And I feel like I said before, he perfectly embodies the heavyweight division because of how dangerous he is. The next point I've got for Ngannou is that he arguably would beat Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. Now, me personally, I think it's a 50-50 fight with Ngannou and Aspinall, and Ngannou versus Jones. I think Aspinall's got the speed, jiu-jitsu, kicks, fight IQ, and accuracy, and Ngannou's got the power, boxing, wrestling experience. But a bad habit that Aspinall has is he gets caught quite a bit. He got caught quite a bit, well, especially with that big shot against Sergey Pavlovich. He got caught a few times against Curtis Blades. You can't afford to do that when you're facing the most devastating heavyweight in the world in Francis Ngannou. And then for Jon Jones has a few advantages. He's got the experience, he's got the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's got the kicks. But I think Francis Ngannou is an absolute nightmare matchup for Jon Jones. That's like the last person you want to be fighting in the UFC if you're Jon Jones. So I think they're both 50-50 fights. Some people would favour Ngannou against Aspinall and Ngannou against Jones, which is why you might think that Ngannou is the best heavyweight on the planet. The next reason is he cleared out the heavyweight division when he was active. You look at the names on Francis Ngannou's resume, on his resume, you might be thinking, okay, he's never really beaten any of the current heavyweights, but he cleared them out at the time. When he beat Cyril Gane, Gane was number 1, undefeated and the interim champion. When he beat Stipe was the champion. When he beat Rosenstrike was ranked number 6. Junior Dos Santos was ranked number 3 at the time. Cain Velasquez was unranked, but Curtis Blades was ranked number 3. So he was fighting the top guys in his era of MMA. People like to talk about how Tom Aspinall clears out the heavyweight division, but so did Francis Ngannou a couple of years ago, and when he was actually active in the UFC. And what's to say he couldn't do the same now? Now, the reasons against Francis Ngannou being the best heavyweight in the world right now, first and foremost, he hasn't cleared out the current heavyweight roster. Like I've just said, he cleared out the heavyweight division when he was active, you know? He can have that, you can give him that. But we're talking about today. We're talking about who's the best today, not the best a couple of years ago when you were active. We're talking about who's the best heavyweight today. You haven't beaten Alexander Volkov. You haven't beaten Pavlovich. You haven't even beaten Aspinall. You haven't beaten Almeida. You haven't beaten Jones. You haven't beaten the top heavyweights in the world as of today. So beating those guys a couple of years ago doesn't mean much. And even Curtis Blades, who he beat in 2018, that was 2018 Curtis Blades. You can't really compare a win over Curtis Blades in 2018 to the current 2024 Curtis Blades. So if we look at the heavyweight division, he hasn't fought most people in the division. He beat Cyril Gane 2.5 years ago. He beat Blades 6 years ago. He beat Stipe 3.5 years ago. He beat Rosenstrike 4 years ago. And the Derek Lewis fight was 6 years ago. So he hasn't cleared out the current state of the heavyweight division, which is why you kind of have to take away from him. The next reason against Ngannou being the best is beating Renan Ferreira doesn't really tell us much. Now, don't get me wrong, like I said before, Ngannou, he did just beat the best champion outside the UFC in Ferreira, but honestly, is Ferreira a top 5 heavyweight if he was to come to the UFC? No, he wouldn't. In fact, Renan Ferreira, he's probably got as much skill as Rosenstrike. These two would probably put on a competitive fight. I'm not even joking. That's probably the same skill level that Renan Ferreira's got is Rosenstrike. So Ngannou going out there, getting a brutal finish, and suddenly everyone's saying that Ngannou's the best heavyweight. Well, is he? Has he beaten a top opponent? Has he beaten Aspinall? Has he beaten a top heavyweight in the UFC? He hasn't. He beat the best in a different organisation, which doesn't really tell us much. The third reason is he's quite inactive as well as Francis Ngannou. We go back to the pound for pound point. To be pound for pound one of the best in the UFC, or at least in the heavyweight division if we're talking about in this topic, you've got to be active. And Ngannou, if you look at his winning streak in the UFC, and I'll get to the fight in the PFL as well, but if you look at his fight in the UFC, Junior Dos Santos was 2019, Rosenstrike was 2020, Stipe was 2021, Cyril Gane was 2022. Then he decides to go box, takes a massive break for his MMA career, and in between Renan Ferreira and Cyril Gane, 33 months. You ain't active. That's the point. Like, Ngannou just isn't an active heavyweight right now. And if we're going to criticize Jones for not being active, you've got to do the same for Francis Ngannou. So his inactivity can be a reason why you might not think he's the best. The next reason, we don't know how he fares in the UFC these days. Now, don't let me wrong. He looked dominant against Renan Ferreira. He really did. But it goes back to my point. We don't know how good Renan Ferreira is compared to the UFC. For all we know, he might get demolished by Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. He might even get demolished in a rematch with Blades or against Volkov or against Jailton Almeida. We don't really know how Ngannou fares in the UFC these days. But we'll move on from Ngannou and we'll go on to the next contender, which is Tom Aspinall. A lot of people think that Tom Aspinall's the best heavyweight in the world right now. Now, the reasons for Tom Aspinall being the best, first and foremost, he's the interim champion, but he's deemed by most as the real champion. Well, you can make the decision between Jones and Aspinall. Who do you think's the best heavyweight right now? The guy with one ranked heavyweight win or the one with 5 ranked heavyweight wins? The guy whose last 2 fights were in February of 2020 and March 2023, or November 2023 and July 2024? The guy who refuses to fight the toughest test, or the guy who's going to fight anyone, even on short notice? The guy who's got no defenses in the heavyweight division, or the guy who's got 1 defense in the heavyweight division? I think it's pretty clear, using those statistics, that Tom Aspinall has to be the better heavyweight right now. Even though he doesn't actually own the belt, most would deem him as the real heavyweight, and in my opinion and in the opinion of many others, when he beat Curtis Blades at UFC 3 or 4 and got that belt wrapped around him, he was, in everyone's eyes, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the real heavyweight champion, at least, of the UFC instead of Jon Jones. That's the first reason for Aspinall. The second reason, he's willing to fight anyone on earth. Aspinall has made it very evident. He doesn't give a shit who he fights. He just wants to fight. He's called out Jon Jones numerous times now. I can't count on my own hand. He's called out Jones so many times. He fought Sergey Pavlovich on like 10 days notice or whatever it was. This was the same Sergey Pavlovich that was a favourite going into the fight. The Sergey Pavlovich that was on a 6-fight winning streak, all by first-round knockout, the scariest dude in the division. Not only that, he's already made it very clear that he's willing to fight anyone when he went against Curtis Blades. He didn't have to defend his interim belt. He could have just waited for a title shot, defended his interim belt against the guy that has beaten him before and he knocked him out. He said he'd happily welcome Ngannou to the UFC. He said he's going to fight the winner of Ngannou and Volkov if they want. He said he'll welcome Alex Pereira to the heavyweight division. That is the example of someone that's willing to fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, any place. And in my opinion, that sort of mentality, which he has shown, not just said, but he's also shown it, has to give him points to being one of the best heavyweights. The next point for Aspinall, he's cleared out the current heavyweight division already. Maybe he's not beating every single name, but we've already been over the fact that Ngannou and Jones haven't really cleared out the heavyweight division. You look at the people Tom Aspinall's beaten. He's beaten more people in the top 10 of the heavyweight division than he hasn't beaten in the top 10. Finished Volkov, Pavlovich, Blades, Spivak, and Tibura. And the thing about these wins that is impressive is he beat them when they were coming off, when those guys were doing well as well. Obviously, he hasn't been able to beat Jon Jones because Jon Jones doesn't want to fight him. Cyril Gane refused multiple times to fight Aspinall, and now he's booked. But the Sergey Pavlovich fight, Pavlovich was on a 6-fight winning streak by first-round knockout of all of them. That was the Pavlovich that Aspinall beat. He fought Curtis Blades when Blades had just finished Jailton Almeida. He fought Volkov when Volkov was coming off a win and had won 3 out of his last 4. He fought, and after that fight with Volkov has now got on a 4-fight winning streak, which is aged well for Aspinall. He fought Spivak when Spivak was on a 3-fight winning streak. He fought Marcin Tibura when Tibura had won 7 out of his last 8. So when he was beating these guys, he wasn't beating them when they were washed up or when they had already just lost. He was beating most of these guys when they were looking good as well, which is impressive when it comes to Aspinall's current resume in the heavyweight division. The next point, he would arguably beat Jones and Ngannou. Similar point that I made to Ngannou. Aspinall, a lot of people think he'd beat them both, and I don't blame you. He's got the grappling. It's not just like he's another one-dimensional guy like Cyril Gane. He has the grappling. He's displayed it in his UFC career, and even outside the UFC career, if you look at his MMA fights outside the UFC. And on top of that, he's one of the most dangerous dudes, if not the most dangerous dude right now in MMA. Well, I'd say Ngannou's probably the most dangerous dude, but the speed that Tom Aspinall has, the accuracy, the fact that he keeps putting people's lights out over and over again. He's coming off 3 first-round knockouts. He is one of the most dangerous men in MMA. Again, similar to the Ngannou pick, you can't really pick anyone against Tom Aspinall with the way that he's looking recently. I'm not saying he's completely unbeatable, but you can't really pick him against anyone. And that kind of brings me on to my next point, which he's the most active heavyweight right now. Francis Ngannou, we've already been over it, he's fairly inactive. You know, Jon Jones, he's also inactive. Tom Aspinall, from his fight with Tibura when he came back from the injury and his fight with Blades, he fought 3 times in 1 year, all of them ending in first-round knockouts. He's already said that he's willing to fight the winner of Gane and Volkov, and he can't fight Jon Jones. So he's now in a position where there's literally no fights for Tom Aspinall. He has no choice but to sit out and wait. Since 2020, Ngannou's fought 4 times. Jones has fought 2 times. Aspinall's fought 9 times since 2020, and that's including that massive knee injury he had against Curtis Blades that forced him to be out for a year. And he keeps coming back and he keeps starching people, and he's already said he wants to be active over and over again. The 6th reason is he looks to be the most skilled heavyweight on planet Earth. I think Tom Aspinall, he's the most skilled heavyweight on planet Earth. I'm going to go out there and say that Tom Aspinall is the most skilled heavyweight in the history of MMA. Maybe that's a bold take, but I think he's more skilled than Stipe. I think he's more skilled than Fedor. I think he's more skilled than Ngannou. I think Tom Aspinall is... We've never seen somebody like Tom Aspinall in the heavyweight division. He moves like a welterweight. He's able to sleep everyone. He's got the grappling. He's very well-rounded. Probably one of the most well-rounded heavyweights we've had in a while. He's athletic. He's quick. He's powerful. He's fast. He's got one-shot accuracy as well. He's got the shortest average fight time in the UFC right now. This dude's... He's just different, man. And Tom Aspinall, I'm also going to say, will never be outclassed in the octagon. I'm not saying he's never going to be submitted. I'm not saying he's never going to be knocked out, but I am saying he's never going to be outclassed. I don't see anybody taking Aspinall to a dominant decision and beating Aspinall. Maybe somebody can get a Hail Mary knockout. Maybe somebody can latch up a submission. But as far as outclassing goes, I don't think any heavyweight will ever outclass Tom Aspinall. It's a bold prediction, but it's just what I think. The seventh reason is he's only legitimately lost once in MMA. Aspinall's got a record of 15-3, as we discussed earlier, but only one of those losses is really notable. One of them was an injury loss to Curtis Blades, in which he blew his knee out a couple of years ago. One of them was a 12-6 illegal elbow, and it wasn't even that illegal. It was just he was on a dodgy promotion that kind of forced him to lose the fight. If you go and watch the fight back, you know what I mean. And one of them was a heel hook, which was a fair and square loss. He did lose that fight. So only really one notable loss on Aspinall's career. You've got Francis Ngannou was lost comfortably and notably twice in the UFC to Derek Lewis and Stipe Miocic. And obviously Aspinall hasn't, so he's only really had one legitimate loss. Now, the reasons against Tom Aspinall being the best heavyweight right now, first and foremost, technically, never touched undisputed gold. I get it. A lot of people think Tom Aspinall is the undisputed heavyweight champion, as we discussed earlier. But technically, it is just still an interim belt that he has just defended against Curtis Blades. He's still yet to fight for the actual undisputed belt. Jon Jones has been the undisputed champion. Francis Ngannou's been the undisputed champion. Tom Aspinall's never been at the top of the heavyweight division with his belt as the undisputed champion, which is kind of what you can take away from him. The second reason, he hasn't really beaten a massive name yet. Francis Ngannou beat Stipe Miocic when Miocic was the champion, looked unstoppable, and Ngannou just went out there and flatlined him. And he's beaten multiple former champions. And Ngannou's got a pretty good resume in the heavyweight division when it comes to, you know, former champions. He's beating those big names. When it comes to Jon Jones, he's a big name in himself. He's top 5 biggest stars in UFC history, in my opinion. He's a massive star. People consider him the GOAT. And he's about to beat Stipe. We've already been over the fact that Stipe is the greatest heavyweight of all time. And to be fair to him, he is quite a big star. Another guy that Jon Jones is about to beat, Tom Aspinall. He hasn't beaten Ngannou. He hasn't beaten Jones. He hasn't even beaten Cyril Gane, who I would consider the next biggest star in the heavyweight division. Tom Aspinall just hasn't beaten that big name in the heavyweight division to get everyone's respect. The next reason is he's got no resume of legends. Jon Jones, I mean, he's a legend in himself. We've already discussed he's one of the greatest of all time. He's beaten so many legends as well in the light heavyweight division. Maybe not in the heavyweight division, but in the light heavyweight division, he's beaten so many legends. And Ngannou, he's beaten 4 former champions in the heavyweight division, one of them being the greatest heavyweight of all time. The only former champion Aspinall's beaten is Andrei Arlovski. When he beat Sergey Pavlovich, he was just a hype train that's on a 2-fight losing streak now. When he fought, when he's fought Volkov, Blades, and Spivak, don't get me wrong, respectable wins, but they're just another contender. He hasn't beaten that big name or that big legend in the heavyweight division. Now, my final conclusion to who the best heavyweight is, I think the best heavyweight in MMA right now is Tom Aspinall. I think the most accomplished heavyweight out of the 3 of them is Francis Ngannou, and I think the most accomplished across all divisions is Jon Jones. So I think they've all got something going for them, but if we're discussing purely the best heavyweight in the world right now, I've got to give it to Francis Ngannou. So that is, in my opinion, the debate settled for who the best heavyweight right now is. Going over points for and against each of the guys. Let me know who you think the best heavyweight in the world right now is in MMA. Thank you for watching.